Few minutes past the hour. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. And welcome to all of you joining us on this unseasonably wintry day here in Toronto. As I think some of you know, our session today is taking place during Sustainability Week. It's the first time we're having it here on the downtown campus, but it's the fourth time we're having it at UofT. On all three campuses and virtually, we have a really wonderful program of events happening all week. And if you haven't already, please check out the listing and participate wherever you can. I think a link has just been added to the chat. So my name is Christy Facer, and I'm the director of the Committee on Environment, Climate Change and Sustainability Secretariat, and I'm here with my colleagues and friends to deliver this online workshop for you today. Maybe by way of introduction, I'll say that we often hear that sustainability and climate challenges that we face are really those that require an all-hands-on-deck kind of approach to problem solving. So the solutions that we're seeking really demand wealth of different kinds of a diversity of expertise and experience to be meaningful, to be relevant, and to have a kind of lasting impact on the changes that we'd like to see in our lives now and into the future. And as members of academic institutions, one of the best tools that we have and can consider deploying in service of this goal is transdisciplinary research and the knowledge and solutions co-production that happens with others that is kind of baked into the process of transdisciplinary knowledge co-production. So I'm really excited about our conversation today, and we have some excellent speakers. I think also in our chat, the instructions have been added in terms of closed captioning. So if you are looking for a way to do that, please follow those directions. They can be found in the chat, and then also there's a button on your toolbar. And then now I also want to pause for a moment and acknowledge the land that we're speaking to you on today. So although we're meeting virtually today, many of us are joining the call from Toronto, and we do wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates and that we're calling in from. Both this land and its surrounding waters have for thousands of years been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. This land remains home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. It's a sacred place, and it provides and reminds us of the importance of learning about the settlement of this land and our relationship to it and its peoples. We're grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land, and we invite you to reflect on how you come to it and the role that you can play in the ongoing journey in reconciliation in Canada. Thank you, Reem. Wonderful to have you here. Our agenda today is pretty simple. You're hearing from me as introduction, and then we will move on to a welcome and remarks from our excellent partner and friend, Nakota Foster, over at the SDGs at UofT, the Sustainable Development Goals Institutional Strategic Initiative, or what we refer to as the SDGISI. And then we will have a detailed presentation from John Robinson on what transdisciplinary co-production is and how it's different from conventional research, followed by a discussion with all of you and questions and answers, and then we will close. So I think I'm through most of the housekeeping, and I can now turn to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Nakota Foster is the Associate Director of the SDGs at ISI. She is strongly committed to addressing the social determinants of health and advocates for the removal of barriers to improving the health and well-being of the most vulnerable in society. She's demonstrated her passion for health equity throughout her career working in sustainability and her research, which focuses on the health and well-being of minority women in Canada. Over the years, Nakota has held several progressive administrative roles with organizations such as the Toronto Metropolitan University's Future Skills Centre, Sinai Health System, and the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario, as well as Cancer Care Ontario. Over to you, Nakota, and welcome again.
Thanks so much, Christy. Struggling there, trying to take myself off mute. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining us today. So we're so pleased to welcome you and also to have collaborated with the CECCS team to develop and deliver this session on transdisciplinary knowledge co-production. So the SDGs at UofT initiative is the newest institutional strategic initiative, also known as the SDG ISI, as Christy had said. And we are designed essentially to tackle the intersecting problems that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development seeks to address. So as you may already know, the SDGs were ratified by 193 member countries of the UN in 2015 to provide a global framework for action for people, planet and prosperity, peace and partnership. And even though the SDGs are relevant to all countries, many people are still left behind, which runs contrary to the SDGs' central principle of leave no one behind. People are still being left behind in both not just low-income countries, but high-income countries as well. So really a shared agenda is critical now more than ever. And while we're at the halfway mark of the 2030 deadline, the SDGs still hold promise and have a lot of potential to make significant impact on the lives of many. So they call for, of course, real-world and contextually sensitive evidence to respond to and also solve implementation problems that are facing policymakers, practitioners, communities, and other social actors. So just to give you a brief overview of the SDGs ISI, in response to that, to the global challenges that the SDGs presents, the SDGs at UofT initiative has articulated a vision that looks to position the University of Toronto as a leader in research that essentially empowers actions on the SDGs and also informs the future global goals for an equitable and sustainable future. So to accomplish this, we've outlined a mission of becoming a global powerhouse of knowledge that really enhances learning, also catalyzes equitable action, and then also facilitates inclusive outcomes on the SDGs through our innovative network of faculty, trainees, as well as partners. So to accomplish our vision and mission, we see transdisciplinary knowledge co-production as an integral component of the work that we'll do to not only address the current SDGs, but to also contribute to the shaping of the future of sustainable development, and by also engaging with community partners to constructively disrupt the status quo and also to dismantle systems of oppression. And so the SDGs at UofT was developed in collaboration with the University of Toronto faculty, as well as our broader student community. And through this collaboration, we co-created this initiative to be guided by values that are well aligned with the paradigm shifting approach of transdisciplinary knowledge co-production. For instance, as an ISI, we really aspire to build capacity for transdisciplinary research through partnerships that are meaningful, reciprocal, and transparent. We also are working to empower and mobilize trainees to cultivate a vibrant community that encourages equitable collaborations. We look to integrate equity, diversity, and inclusion into our research activities that are grounded, again, in concepts of reciprocity, responsibility, respect, and relevance to decolonize research methods and pedagogies through collaborations with diverse groups that have historically been excluded from research. We also want to nurture transdisciplinary collaborations that bring together different disciplines and sectors to meaningfully address the SDGs. And lastly, we look to integrate reflexivity into our research as a way to enable us to examine how our beliefs, assumptions, and judgments influence our practices in conducting research. So our values are reflected in all our initiatives, including, of course, our SDG Scholars Academy, which is our flagship initiative that is a think tank that will bring together leading researchers by mobilizing them in open dialogue to advance knowledge, encourage integrated transdisciplinary understandings, and also to address issues that are critical to sustainable development. And so to do this, the SDG Scholars Academy will, one, catalyze research that reflects epistemological as well as methodological diversity. will also empower trainees to engage in research, build sustainable collaborations, and also mobilize the results of this research in partnership with communities. So the SDGs at UofT initiative has 4 research themes that will further enable us to address the interdependence of the SDGs, to essentially tackle measurement challenges related to assessing the SDG progress, and also catalyze co-created research that will inform the design of sustainable and equitable transition pathways for cities, that tackles the climate crisis and moves the needle beyond performative global announcements, and also systematically address inequities for groups made structurally vulnerable. So this year in 2024, we consider this to be a year of renewal for us. And it's also a chance for us to move the needle even further in advancing our vision of being transformative. When the SDGs were created, the universities were not at the table. And this is a gap that we seek to address through the SDGs at UofT initiative. So we'll engage in transdisciplinary research that is co-produced and also has a dual purpose of empowering positive actions on the current SDGs while shaping the direction of the future goals. And so I'll stop here and I'll say thank you again for joining us. And please visit our website if you are interested in learning more about the SDGs ISI. And also, you can also follow us on our social media platforms to keep up to date with our activities and opportunities for engagement as well. So thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Dakota. It's always fantastic to hear about values, centering our work in values, and I think it's very relevant to our conversation here today. And it's fantastic to hear all about the SDGs ISI, especially that part, which really resonated with me. So on to what some might call the grilled tofu of the day. Our main speaker, the wonderful John Robinson. John Robinson is a professor at the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, and also at the School of the Environment at the University of Toronto. He's an adjunct professor at Copenhagen Business School and at UofT, the presidential advisor on environment, climate change, and sustainability, and our guiding light at the CECCS is one of our co-chairs. Professor Robinson's research focuses on sustainable buildings, neighborhoods, and cities, climate change mitigation, adaptation, and sustainability, participatory backcasting and scenario analysis, sustainability transitions and transformations, art and sustainability, and the role of the university in sustainability transitions, as well as the history and philosophy of sustainability. So John is a busy guy. And he has a lot of experience to lend us on the topic of transdisciplinary co-production and how it's different from conventional research. Over to you, John. Welcome and thank you.
Thanks very much, Christy. I'm just going to share my screen and convert. So I hope that's displaying appropriately. It's a real pleasure to be here. I believe that there's a huge hunger and latent demand for research of a different kind than the kind we were often trained in. And that hunger has to do with wanting to work out in society, in communities, in neighborhoods, in a kind of reciprocal partnership form of exchange of knowledge and development of knowledge. So that's what lies behind this workshop and this presentation. And I'm therefore calling it Changing the Channel, because I think that is, in a sense, what we need to do if we want to engage really actively with community in this kind of reciprocal way. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to do 3 things. First, very briefly, talk about the overall context, why there is a need and a desire to do this kind of work. And I want to spend quite a bit of time talking about what this kind of work is. What do we mean by transdisciplinary knowledge co-production? Words that have too many syllables to be meaningful to most people. And so we'll talk through a little bit of that. And then I want to use a project that we're working on right now called Visionary Communities as an example of an attempt to apply this approach. So a more practical discussion where we really have found that trying to do this in a very active way has transformative effects on the work itself. So that's the three things I want to do, starting with rethinking the context. This is a slide that shows an excerpt from an article that came out in Nature in 2009 from Indira Samarasekera, who at that time was president of the University of Alberta. And she said, it's time to construct a new social contract. Sorry, my screen is not cooperating. It's time to construct a new social contract between research universities and their public and private partners, one that both promotes the pursuit of basic research and encourages solution-driven work. And this, I think, can be seen as an argument in favor of what has been called the third mission of universities. And the third mission was originally conceptualized as in the 1960s, for example, primarily as about helping to make industry grow faster and develop more. But more recently, the focus has kind of shifted. And I would say the dominant perspective now about the third mission is that it is about the universities going past the first two missions, which of course are research and teaching, into a deeper engagement with society on the grand challenges, the big problematiques that face society, such as sustainability. So how can the university take on this responsibility of engaging actively with society? An example of this is Arizona State, the famous reconfiguration of the whole university that President Michael Crow has been working on for about 20 years now, and where they say that a key role of the university is to improve the life of the local community within which the university sits. This isn't a typical idea about the role of the university in the past, but increasingly that kind of challenge has been posed to universities, both in terms of researchers inside, but also in terms of questions and demands from society outside the university. I think trying to do this, taking this third mission seriously, talking about the role of the university in engaging actively with these kinds of problems necessitates a shift in the nature of the research itself. It implies a different mode of research than the typical researcher-led approach that we're mostly all trained in as academics. And it has led to a growing interest in ideas of knowledge co-production as a way of enabling this third mission. So what do we mean by knowledge co-production? Well, this is an article came out in Nature Sustainability a few years ago, where they say, we define knowledge co-production as iterative and collaborative processes involving diverse types of expertise, knowledge, and actors to produce context-specific knowledge and pathways towards a sustainable future. You can see just in that text a rather different orientation. This isn't curiosity-driven research on its own. This isn't a fundamental research on its own. This is research that's really directed towards addressing in a fruitful way real-world problems outside the academy. And you can see in this article, they suggest four kind of components of this kind of work. It's context-based, so that another way of thinking about this is that it is place-based, where that place can be a geographic place, an intellectual place, it's a theoretical place, and so on. It's pluralistic in that it recognizes multiple ways of being and knowing and doing. It's goal-oriented, it's problem-oriented to address real issues and problems in society. And crucially, it's interactive. It involves this kind of reciprocal relationship that I mentioned earlier. So that's a kind of general sense of what knowledge co-production is. The knowledge gets produced not simply by the experts or the academics in the room or even the experts out in society, but by a range of partners, of organizations in a community or in the neighborhood. And the interaction among all of these players gives rise to this co-produced knowledge. One thing that's very obvious in the field of transdisciplinary knowledge co-production is that this prefix co applies in many contexts. We can talk about a co-creation of partnerships, where the initial impetus to develop some kind of relationship is co-created, and the goals that are intended to be pursued are co-created. We have the co-production of the knowledge itself that emerges out of that process, co-designing the project work and co-managing it, co-implementation of results, and so on. So we have all these co's, all of which, because they involve multiple perspectives and multiple participants, coming often from very different points of view, give rise to emergent properties and emergent understandings. So inherently unpredictable, the results of this kind of work is you can't map it out, you can't have a blueprint with a clear understanding of exactly what you're going to get to because of these emergent properties and understandings. Now, obviously, not all research is of this kind. There's lots of room and there's lots of need for conventional disciplinary research, for example, engineering work or economic work or social science analysis or legal, etc. Lots of room and need for work of that kind. But if we're going to do projects in partnership with community, then that conventional work, that more disciplinary work perhaps, needs to connect to the larger transdisciplinary agenda if the ultimate goal is actionable knowledge, knowledge that will be useful and fruitful in the world. Having said that, it's important to note that there are different ways of doing knowledge co-production. This isn't a single sort of outline or template that can be applied to any particular circumstance. One recent paper suggests that one way to differentiate the different kinds of knowledge co-production projects is by looking at questions related to purpose, power, politics, and pathways. Why should we do this? How is agency conceptualized? How are power relations changed by the work? How are impacts catalyzed? And you can see that they have outlined two typical answers for each of these four questions. Answering these four questions allows you to kind of map out what you're trying to do in your knowledge co-production project. In the case of the project of Visionary Communities, I'll be talking about in a little while, we end up answering these questions in this way. In terms of purpose, we do want to solve problems and to reframe problems. We're more interested in system agency than direct agency or individual agency. We are very interested in empowering marginalized actors more so than influencing powerful actors. And we think this whole process will be most effective by processes, very conscious and explicit processes of relating together. In the context of the article that's cited at the bottom of the screen, that puts us into group 5 of the 6 modes that this article talks about. We're in the navigating differences mode. So there's very different ways to do this kind of work. There isn't a single template. But no matter which of the 6 modes or any other modes you might be undertaking and trying to pursue, all of these different bits of work, if they are indeed transdisciplinary and involve knowledge co-production, involve moving from more what we might call more extractive, and perhaps a less pejorative term is more researcher-led, to more reciprocal approaches to research. On the left are a more familiar set of propositions that underlie most traditional academic research, where the world is a source of data, basically. Our primary audience is other academics, and therefore our primary products are academic products, referee journal papers, for example, And the research questions, crucially, are chosen by the researchers, and they're chosen before the engagement with community happens. On the other side of the chart, more reciprocal approaches that suggest, well, maybe it's useful to think of the world as a partner rather than as a source of data, simply as a source of data, that focus on multiple non-academic audiences, not just academic audiences, and multiple non-academic outputs, lots of different products, not all referee journal articles. And just as crucially, as in the last list, where the research itself is co-designed. So the research questions emerge out of the interaction with the partners. They are not predetermined by the academic side of the house. The problem, of course, is that typically, hopefully this is changing over time, but typically still we're not trained on this right-hand side of the chart. We're trained in the left-hand side of the chart. And so that makes it hard. That means it's a trial and error process, learning by doing process. One of the purposes of this workshop and related workshops is to make some information available to help people decide if they are interested in pursuing this kind of work and what it might involve. But it's important to recognize that doing this kind of work takes more time. You have to spend a lot of time working with partners and figuring out joint agendas, figuring out governance structures, rules of engagement, all that stuff takes time. As it indicated by the right-hand side of the table, this work involves production of many non-academic outputs. There's an opportunity cost there in terms of academic outputs. Out of a given number of hours, the more time you spend on non-academic outputs, the less time you have on academic ones. And it leads to more interdisciplinary publications. Typically, you're publishing in more interdisciplinary journals, which may or may not be high status journals in disciplinary departments where many people are doing their degree or are employed. So what this means is this kind of work is high risk, especially for grad students, say PhD students, who have to get through a process in their department, and junior faculty who of course have to go through promotion and tenure processes. So what is heartening is, just to back up for a second, what's heartening is that even though it's high risk, there's a lot of interest in this. And a lot of people or increasingly researchers are trying to engage in this kind of work. So that's a very heartening thing. They're not doing it because it's easier or they're more rewarded. They're doing it because it's inherently interesting to them. So what's involved in doing this kind of work? Well, we can think of some characteristics that might apply to an attempt to develop this kind of project. And this is a list, many different lists could be developed. This is just one. It's problem focused, as we talked about earlier. It's highly interdisciplinary, and it's interactive in the sense that it involves engaging in ways that are somewhat unpredictable, give rise to emergent properties. It's reflective in the sense that when you're working with people that come from very different points of view, you have to really think a little bit about where you're coming from and how that relates to what other people are doing. All of these are characteristics of problem-driven interdisciplinary research that can happen entirely within the community. If we add involving strong forms of collaboration with non-academic partners, that takes us into the realm of transdisciplinary work and transdisciplinary knowledge co-production. I just want to give a brief indication of some of the lessons we learned in 3 years of working with a lot of partners in the community, leading up to a research funding proposal that failed. It failed. We didn't get the funding, but we learned a lot. And just quickly to run through some of the lessons, we were thinking of a project based in Toronto, but it soon became clear that if we're talking about neighborhoods and communities, there are many Torontos. You need a very diverse and tailored engagement. It's not a one size fits all. It's not a single message. It's not a single identity. Rather, many Torontos. And within the many Torontos, there are many agendas. Not everything is win-win. Sometimes there are big trade-offs between different agendas, and it's crucial to be able to deal with conflict in the case of the research itself, real differences of views and opinions and preferences. We were told over and over again, be concrete and be relevant. Don't give us your theories. Try and turn that into something that relates to the day-to-day experience of people. Make it personal, make it concrete, make it relevant. Work with and through trusted intermediaries. Don't parachute into communities and say, hey, we're here and we're going to do all this wonderful stuff. Come and join our project. Instead, find organizations already in the middle of engagement and activity in the community you're interested in. Think of ways in which academic research can actually add value to what's already going on in the community, can add through connective tissue, connecting to other work that people in that neighborhood or community might not have time to look into. So making those kinds of connections, doing evaluation work, which is often required of community activities, but there's very little budget or time for, and so on. There's ways in which the academic component can add real value to existing activities, excuse me. And recognize contributions and compensate for barriers to participation. That we have a salary, so our research grants basically pay for our grad students and direct research costs, but for everybody else, there's a real cost involved in participation, and that has to be recognized. Some practical approaches that emerge out of this are some principles we developed: no net increase and mutual benefit. That means everybody is too busy to breathe already, just getting food on the table and getting the kids to soccer practice and just getting through life. So the partnership should not add activities. It should find areas of overlap that the existing agendas of both sides are enhanced by the partnership. So it's not about new things. Let's do all these new things that nobody would have done otherwise. Let's find things we can do together that help your pre-existing agenda and my pre-existing agenda. That's no net increase and mutual benefit. Over and over again, we learned that enhancing the project was what we were interested in, but that only works in a partnership sense if it's also building the community. Real governance implications of this kind of work. How do you develop governance systems that have all the partners involved in the key decisions, budget decisions and work plan decisions? There's a real need to work on and ultimately agree on partnership principles, the theory of change underlying the project, approach to research, who does what, the roles and the work plan. All of that stuff needs to be worked out. That takes time and energy, but it's crucial for the success of the project. And then the budgetary implication, as I suggested a minute ago, is that we need to have funding for partner involvement. I think it's important to be clear about the consequences of this approach to research. It takes time and has major challenges for academics. There's a loss of control over the overall research agenda. It's now co-produced. It's not just up to the researcher, the academic researchers. This leads to a kind of culture problem because the academic culture is one where the research questions come from within the culture. They don't come from outside, or they come from an academic interpretation of what's going on outside. So that has to be addressed. The reward system, if you're early career faculty, you're going through promotion and tenure processes. Will this kind of work be rewarded? How about all the non-academic outputs? Maybe they don't count as much. There's timeline issues. Sometimes the academy moves too slowly for society, and sometimes it's the other way around. So working those out is important. And then funding, getting funding for the research. What kind of criteria are involved? The academic funding councils and foundations and other funding agencies have their own criteria that may or may not map well onto this kind of work. Having said all that, there's massive benefits, much stronger relationships with partners if they're truly reciprocal relationships, access at a much deeper level to partner knowledge and expertise, if it's valued from the beginning as crucial to the project, opportunity to test theories and concepts from the academic literature in the world that the partners live and work in, and opportunity to contribute to actual change processes, to make a difference in the world, which is usually the kind of overriding guiding motivation for a lot of work of this kind. I think we can also start thinking about what kind of skills are useful for doing this kind of work. This is just one set developed out of conversations I've had with a number of other people who do these kinds of projects. Pattern recognition, looking for connections between post-structuralist literary theory and non-equilibrium thermodynamics. You know, these are different worlds. They don't talk to each other, but maybe there's something in common here that reflects a larger process of intellectual development. Shape-shifting, can you easily find your way into conversations with people from very different backgrounds? Can you shape-shift enough that you can have that meaningful conversation with people coming from completely different points of view? Embracing contradiction and dancing with polarities, recognizing that differences abound and there isn't a single way to describe and map everything. You made some choices, there's some trade-offs and so on. Adaptability and curiosity. Curiosity is a really powerful process, unfortunately not always found in the academic world. Curiosity about what's going on in other fields even. How many PhD students in, say, sociology talk to PhD students in, say, civil engineering, and vice versa? Very few. We tend to be within our own community. And opportunity seeking. So those are individual skills. Then we think perhaps of social skills that are useful, collective skills about enabling rather than doing. You don't have to do everything. You can facilitate, foster, encourage, support, etc. Build on existing work instead of reinventing the wheel and coming up with some whole new project and so on. These are just ideas of, tentative ideas of the kinds of skills that are useful in doing this kind of work. Then there's the question of evaluation. How do we know if we're on the right track? And here I would propose a kind of three-tier approach where there's process evaluation. Is the process fair, inclusive, equitable, just, efficient, have good coverage, and so on? That's a fairly standard kind of evaluation, but it's really crucial, as Nakota suggested in her remarks. These are really important criteria that need to be paid attention to. Then there's the evaluation of outputs and outcomes. And here you can see both first order effects and second order effects, the immediate products, and then the consequences of those products, the second order consequences. What one of my PhD students called the splash and the ripple. Those are hard to assess, but even harder is the longer term impact. Does this project contribute to a sustainability transition in any way? And how would we know that? Here's some work that Kim Slater did as a PhD dissertation working with 12 community groups in Toronto that were funded by the Atmospheric Fund. And she worked with them in a kind of empowerment evaluation, formative evaluation kind of way to develop a framework using these three tiers that was kind of a workbook that you followed through and you co-create the criteria and the evaluation framework with the groups being evaluated so that it's a useful exercise for them. It's not just ticking the boxes for the funder. And this is an important issue. The difficult one is this question of whether the work is actually contributing to societal transformations or not. There's lots of work to be done on that front. Okay, I want to turn for the last few minutes to the question of the project that we have developed. It involves embracing emergence, and the title here is Reframing and Reimagining the Visionary Communities Project. The picture on the right are the staff of the East Scarborough Storefront, one of our community partners. We didn't start here, though. We started here. We started with a SSHRC proposal. And based on our experience in the Future Talks project that I mentioned earlier, where we spent 3 years working with partners and then failed to get funding, we realized they had put a lot of sweat equity and labor into that project, and then nothing happened. They got nothing out of it. So we thought, well, okay, we're going to get the funding first. And so this is our SSHRC application. We submitted, it was called Urban Climate Action Living Lab, UCAL, and we asked for 400K over 4 years, and we got 300K over 4 years. So we got funded, and then we went to our partners, or then we started reframing and reimagining the project. And the first reframing and reimagining was exactly that process I've just described. Get the funding first, and do partnership development and project planning second. So in violation of co-production principles, we submitted the SSHRC Insight proposal on our own without involving partners in writing it at all. But once it was funded, we went to our partners and we said, okay, let's design the project now that we know we have funding. And so there's some consequences of this kind of approach. First of all, half our budget we're giving to our partners. That has significant implications, say, for funding of grad students. It also led to a major change in language and concepts. Remember, this was called the Urban Climate Action Living Lab project. We were told by our partners, don't talk to us about living labs. We're not a petri dish. Don't treat us like we're a lab experiment. In fact, don't use the word experiment. We've got communities that have been literally experimented on in horrible ways in the past. We don't like this term experiment. So this was interesting because there's a huge literature out there on living labs and on societal experiments, none of which, as far as I can tell, is betrays any awareness of this concern about the language. But it certainly was expressed to us. And we also discovered that there was an approach that had a 23-year gestation process already in the community we're working with. So we didn't have to provide the whole theoretical sort of armature. There was a ton of material already there that we could work with. And so that led us to what is now the name of the project, Visionary Communities, Advancing Desired Neighborhood Futures in the Kingston, Galloway, Orton Park neighborhood of East Scarborough, and led us to a purpose and objectives that we refined and developed in partnership with the community partners that we were working with. And so the research team consisted of myself and my co-lead, a postdoc, Kim Slater, as the two leads of the project, a research faculty, a fantastic group of 4 faculty, 2 community partners, crucially, Sahara Vermaziari from the director of the East Scarborough Storefront, Nam Glozier from Catalyst Circle, and then a bunch of grad students. The community partners that I've referred to several times are essential to everything about this project. The East Scarborough Storefront was established about 24 years ago, and so it's deeply rooted in the community. It's been around for a long time. It's built relationships. It has high awareness of what's going on in the KGO neighborhood and so on. The Catalyst Circle is an organization that spun out of the Storefront because the Storefront had developed this connected community approach you can see on the right of the screen, but they were too busy doing it to be able to make it available to others or articulate it or document it. So out of the Storefront spun the Center for Connected Communities, which in turn led to the Catalyst Circle, whose mandate is to take this approach and articulate it. So there now exists a web environment in which many documents about the connected community approach, the theory of change underlying it, the ways of doing it, and so on, those are all now available because of this brilliant institutional innovation to spin off an organization that would take that practice and theorize it and articulate it. So those are our 2 community partners. Crucially, the East Scarborough Storefront is not just a service delivery organization. It does offer services like translation services, or you can come in and use their computers, or immigration advice and so on. But it's much more than that. It's what we call a backbone organization, which sees as its mandate to help the neighborhood reach its goals, to create societal change. So beyond service delivery to societal change. And that's critical, I think, for doing this kind of work that we're interested in. The Connected Communities approach developed at Storefront and articulated by the Catalyst Circle has, as I said, a bunch of documents and literature around it. Here's the 10 keys that kind of summarizes the approach lying behind the Connected Communities approach. I won't go through all 10 of these. We spent a whole half day just talking about one of them at a recent meeting out in Scarborough of the whole research team. But you get a sense just from scanning quickly over them of what's going on and the orientation of and the amount of thinking that's gone into the Connected Communities approach. This leads us directly to the reframing and reimagining number 2. And we say this to the city, we've gone to them and said, the way you approach engaging residents of these neighborhoods in your agendas is you lead with climate, because we're working with the Environment and Climate Division of the city. And you try to get people to join that agenda, try and get people to do the things you're telling them that need to be done in order to meet our targets, our goals for emission reduction. What we're going to do in this project is spend 4 years piloting a different way of approaching residents, perhaps especially in marginalized or low income or highly racialized communities, but perhaps much more generally applicable as well. And that's an approach that says, don't lead with climate change. People actually aren't all that interested in that issue, and it's certainly not in the city's take of that issue. Start by listening a little bit and start by talking about what are the aspirations and priorities of the neighborhood itself. The question we ask is, what kind of neighborhood do you want to live in? What kind of neighborhood do you want your kids to grow up in if you have kids? And we don't introduce climate action or sustainability at all. It might emerge spontaneously, but it doesn't come from us. What we're interested in is what's going on in this neighborhood. What are the activities and priorities and groups and sort of areas of energy that are happening already in the community? And only later in the project, in years 2 and 3, we'll start to say, where's the overlap between that and climate action and sustainability? So instead of all of these other dimensions being co-benefits, that's the usual way it's termed. The climate is driving the ship and there's all these co-benefits. Let's do it the other way around. All these aspirations and concerns about, say, affordable housing or healthcare or mobility, transit access or food, all of these are the central focus, and then climate becomes the co-benefit. So the consequence of this kind of approach is that we're spending the first year of the project basically listening, doing asset mapping, context analysis, momentum surfacing, trying to move away from the negative framing that often accompanies approaches to analyzing these kinds of neighborhoods, that focuses on all the barriers and all the difficulties, all the problems, and paints a picture of the neighborhood as essentially, paints a very negative picture. And we're trying to build on what's already going on, which reflects the priorities and values of that neighborhood. Our third reframing and reimagining is combining theoretical frameworks. We came to the project with this focus on social practice theory, which says, let's talk about collective agency, not just individual agency, and the idea of normalizing sustainability, make sustainability the default, not the explicit, not the change. And when we compared those ways of thinking with the Connected Communities approach, we saw a common focus on collective action. So the focus of our work is not on individual preferences and values and activities, but more on groups and organizations active in the community. We're looking to surface momentum. Can we create a heat map of what's already going on in the neighborhood? And can we eventually support points of collective action? This is the 7 activities we see as part of the 4-year project. The ones that have a line around them are the ones we're starting to do. So these aren't sequential necessarily. We're doing a lot of work on listening and momentum surfacing, on painting a picture of the desired future for the neighborhood. We're going to try and do some participatory modeling where the models are actually co-built by groups and organizations in the neighborhood instead of being entirely expert-driven models from outside. And we're already starting the evaluation process because you need to do that throughout the life of the project. This is expensive, and we only had a limited budget, so we just recently got funding from the City of Toronto and my tax for another $100,000 for this next year, which allowed us to hire new grad students and do the work you can see on the right-hand side of the page. Quite an elaborate process of asset mapping and momentum surfacing that we're going to do. The initial conclusions from this project, it's still very early days, of course, and there's a lot of learning by doing still going on. But we think the focus on momentum surfacing, on what's already going on and sort of what its direction is, will connect us to ongoing collective activities in the neighborhood that will be a base for later years of the project, where we will get into scenario analysis and backcasting and pathways analysis and piloting activities in the community. The project is still resource constrained, so every one of our subsequent years, we're going to have to raise more funds. Our core funding really just allows us to exist. And as illustrated in these reframings and reimaginings I've been talking about, our activities to date have been actually transformative for our understanding of what strong knowledge co-production entails. We had no idea coming into this how different things would be than we had thought. We knew we'd be changing things, but the degree of change and the richness and the excitement generated have been mind-blowing, actually. So stepping back from the project, back to the general question of transdisciplinary knowledge co-production, I think this kind of work offers great rewards, fantastic rewards, but also great challenges. And so we really need to address those challenges if we're going to be able to do this kind of work. 2 of the key priorities, I think, if we want to pursue this work, is a real co-design of governance and research questions. It has to be a truly reciprocal partnership where the partners in the community or the neighborhood, whatever area you're working in, participate actively in designing the very goals of the project, the questions we want to answer, and are part of the governance, explicitly part of the governance. And secondly, of course, we have to provide support for researchers and grad students, but we also need to provide support, i.e. funding, for the partners themselves if they're going to spend time in the project. From a university point of view, I think this kind of work is very powerful. It offers an opportunity to engage in a way that more traditional researcher-led research doesn't typically do at all. But that in turn suggests there's an important role for the universities in supporting and contributing to this kind of work and the sustainability transitions it's about. So we need to think about our reward system. We need to think about the incentives we offer to faculty and grad students, the criteria we use to judge their work. All of those things should be being examined in order to support, if we really want to do this kind of deeply engaged research. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks so much, Sean. And maybe I can just say that on behalf of everybody here, a virtual round of applause for you. With that presentation. We now have an opportunity to move to Q&A and some discussion. And we already have a couple of questions already lining up, but maybe the first reflection I'll make is around something that I think was maybe more implicit in what you were talking about. And I really want to kind of underline the point around why transdisciplinary research is particularly relevant to sustainability challenges. So, we often hear about, a need for us to shift from a sort of behavioral focused approach where we all need to just recycle and that'll save the planet, to looking at things in a much less linear way, to thinking about the multi-directional, intersectional, and that kind of messiness that is involved in dealing with sustainability challenges. And I really saw that in some of those pictures, the multiple horizons, the backbone institutions that are really kind of pointing out how the responsibility and the opportunities around sustainability are shared amongst many. And I mentioned at the beginning of the session today, the all hands on deck approach. And I thought that really visualized it nicely. I also really like this kind of idea of bringing the kind of social, the human, the justice, the power issues into the forefront and moving, the environmental and into the co-benefits approach, as opposed to the other way around, which we've seen historically. So I think that's really important, and I like that you ended with the sort of point around how this has inspired a sense of humility. We're not going in with a solution to these groups. We're saying, okay, you have assets, you've been working on this for 20 years. What can we bring and what can we add and what can we work on together? And that's really interesting. So let me,
Christy,
yeah,
just
go ahead,
to
John.
quickly pick up on your all hands on deck, that you framed it really nicely at the beginning in that way. I just wanted to give an example of that. The
Please.
City of Toronto has climate action goals related to buildings, energy, transportation, and waste. The buildings goals would require us to basically retrofit every single building in Toronto by 2040. And there is no chance in the universe this will be done by top-down decision-making imposing retrofits. They recognize, and everybody is increasingly recognizing, we have to engage people where they are, in their neighborhoods, in their communities, because if they're not on board and supportive and actively engaged, we're just not going to get there. So that would be my answer to the question of, why. We cannot achieve our sustainability goals by top-down command and control. It just won't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And as somebody who's dipped my toe in the retrofit experience, I will say that the moment that I mentioned it at a community gathering, I mean, the kind of excitement, the interest that was there, it was really interesting. And also, as somebody who's gone through it, that was probably a better source of information, was in that discussion than through some of the more official channels. So let's move on to the questions from our audience here. The first one I'd like to put to you, John, is how would you avoid the scenario in which research participants or those that you're collaborating with are trying to sort of control or block the research if they don't like the conclusions, or a sort of withdrawal at the end if they're concerned about how they will be portrayed?
Yeah, I think this goes to the heart of the whole point of doing this kind of work, because I think these kinds of outcomes happen more often in sort of researcher-led extractive approaches where people get turned off by the whole they don't feel listened to, and so they withdraw at the end. And you can't, of course, prevent people blocking or vetoing things if they choose to do that. But the more time you spend actually building productive relationships and governance procedures that allow people to feel that their position has been articulated, has been discussed, is part of the process, hasn't been ignored, the less likely, I believe, you get those kinds of outcomes. Of course, in the end, everybody gets to do what they do. But I think that if you have a process where people really feel they have co-created the work, they're much more likely to want to support and stand by the conclusions.
Great. And maybe Nakota, I wonder if you have anything to add. You spoke a little bit about the importance of relationships and reciprocity and transparency, and it strikes me that, you know, when you're studying to complete your PhD, you don't learn about how to build relationships with people outside of universities, and yet it is so core to this work. You know, what guidance would you offer to, you know, whether to researchers, whether they're PhD students or faculty members pursuing transdisciplinary co-production?
That's true. You know, just in terms of some of the softer skills, if you will, or some of the skills that you learn as you're going through, you know, kind of your PhD. Those are some of the gaps. And actually, when we were developing the SDGs ISI, that was one of the, you know, kind of one of the areas of priority that was articulated by our student participants, wanting more opportunities to participate in research, but, you know, they're feeling that introducing research training earlier in their education trajectory would actually be beneficial for them. You know, if they have you know, kind of a desire or a plan to continue. So, you know, I agree with John. I think that if the study, like if the research was truly participatory, and just thinking about the governance of the research project as well, you know, whereby power is truly shared, decision making is equally weighted, then it's definitely more likely that research participants will, you know, endorse as well as embrace the results that are there. So if it's truly co-created, then nothing should be a surprise, really, at the end. You know, the conclusions, the themes, everything that emerges from the research will be, you know, the community will feel a sense of ownership of the output. So, you know, I think that we're almost there. You know, I've had an opportunity to interact with a few very young early career researchers, and you know, it's great to see how far we've come in terms of you know, learning how to co-produce you know, research and work with research partners, building those relationships you know, with community members. And you know, I think that yeah, we're heading in the right direction for sure. But if it's definitely, if you know, from the outset, if power is shared and participants are truly involved in the co-production process, then there's very you know, there's a higher chance that there will be sense of ownership over the output.
Oh, that's great. And I wanted to ask a follow-up, and it looks like there's one point in the chat that I'll go to next. You know, I think about the tools that we have as researchers in an institution like a university to help us with working with research participants, let's say. And in a way, it makes me think of a shift from consent forms to rules of engagement and some of those other vehicles that you mentioned in your presentation, John. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the distance between those two and how you could kind of start to activate questions of governance, which I think is almost a foreign term to many researchers.
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge. The Research Ethics Board is all about pretty much researcher-led, quite extractive research, right? So you have to get informed consent. But that consent is not participation in any way. It's not co-creation. It's just agreeing to be a source of data, basically. So, you know, maybe ultimately we need research ethics. We're going to continue to need that kind of work. That'll always go on, of course, but maybe we need another track in our research approval processes, which say, ask about governance processes, ask about how you're working respectfully and reciprocally, and are you adhering to these kind of standards of shared power and so on. That I don't. There isn't right now any need for approval of any of those things because it's not part of the ethics thing. But ultimately, I think we do start to need to try and codify some of these, good practices and so on, make that available to people. So even if it isn't an approval process, I think the university could play a role in articulating some of these ideas about what is good transdisciplinary co-production work about. And so that, I mean, in a way, this workshop is a piece of that. What SDGs at ISI at UofT are doing is part of that same process, right? And trying to make available to interested researchers ideas about how to do this kind of work, but we need quite a lot more of that. It's not institutionalized very deeply in our universities, I think.
I'll just add also to that so I'm at the UTSC, the Scarborough campus, and we have an EDI specialist that's been embedded in the VPRI team here for a short period of time, and her role is really to sort of do a review of the processes, right, within our office, with the goal of embedding EDI principles throughout the research life cycle, essentially, and offering researchers support with integrating this as a part of kind of, their proposals, their scope of work, et cetera, especially, in areas or across disciplines where this is something new to a lot of people. And, I do think that there's an opportunity for us to think about how we can do something similar with knowledge co-production in terms of making tools available to researchers who are interested in learning a bit more, that might not have had the training, right, that is now more available to some of the early career researchers or researchers that are just entering the field. So I just wanted to flag that.
And maybe worth pointing out that south of the border, EDI offices are being shut down by fiat. There's about 20 states now that have different rules about basically eliminating jobs related to EDI issues. So this isn't a done deal that it's a one-way trajectory here. We really need to make the case of the crucial importance of this. And in Canada, we don't have yet, and maybe hopefully never, that kind of political pressure against this kind of work. But it's something, just to be aware of, that there are countercurrents out there. And so we have to make hay while the sun shines, maybe, and really push this and embed it as deeply as we can into the, infrastructure of the universities. So it's hard to reverse.
Yeah, and I think we can learn a lot from people who are thinking about those principles of EDI and wondering how we can weave it into our work, thinking about how we articulate expectations and make people comfortable early and build in that accountability process that both of you spoke about. So this brings me to the question in the chat. So as you shift and share power with marginalized actors in these kinds of collaborations, how do you address power differences within the marginalized group itself? For example, in a community, how do you create a space for which a neurodivergent woman might feel silenced by a man who isn't neurodivergent but is from the same community? How do you create the structures that redistribute the power within these communities?
Yeah, I think this is exactly the kind of thing that is invisible from the point of view of more traditional research, but is front and center when you start to do this kind of work. And so I don't know all, all the right answers for sure, but I'm pretty sure that part of it has to do with rules of engagement that get articulated early in the process about respectful and reciprocal relationships, about giving space to speak. But it also, it seems to me, relates to this idea of the backbone organization and working with existing organizations that already have developed trust and ways of addressing exactly these kinds of issues over the years. So not parachuting in as, this kind of academic enterprise that's going to be all things to all people, but actually trying to work with what's already going on in the community. That, of course, doesn't resolve conflict. And there's another question in the Q&A that says, exactly about that. How do we address conflict? One of the ways we're trying to do that is by recognizing that the question of pathways and of futures is a question of plurals. There isn't a single view in the neighborhood about what kind of neighborhood do you want to live in. There's not just one answer to that question. Everybody in the neighborhood agrees. No, we imagine there are maybe quite divergent and different views about what a desirable neighborhood is. And so part of it is a kind of a pluralism of recognizing multiplicity, recognizing there are differences, legitimate differences in perspective that come from different points of view, and try to create processes that allow those to surface. So try to overcome the kinds of silencing processes that happen. My favorite example of this in a sort of coarser way is the term the city of Vancouver used to use at talking about public meetings. They talk about the STP problem. And the STP problem was it was the same 10 people that came to all the public meetings. And they tended to be of a certain racial makeup, a certain income level, a certain, like they were people who were used to being listened to and used to speaking in these kinds of events. And they dominated the conversation or were the only people in the room. So we do need to figure out how best to create processes that will make people feel welcome to participate in, and that escape from that. But it's a work in progress, certainly in our case.
Yeah. I'll just add to that there are a couple of cases that I've come across where there is a research project that was being done in a community where if we're going to talk about the insider outsider debate, the researchers will be considered kind of the outsiders conducting research in this community. And I think what they found helpful was having, of course, you have gatekeepers, but almost like a guide of some sort, kind of embedding like a member of the community who is more or less a pillar of the community as a part of the research team. And so they should sort of help with navigating some of those more, difficult situations that might require sort of an insider to help with navigating the challenges. The other thing, that we've done in certain spaces is, and this might be a challenge, especially if you're on a very tight timeline, you have limited resources, is maybe creating a space where people who have been, they're part of a larger group, but there's maybe some evidence that there is marginalization happening where they could be comfortable participating. So maybe sessions for women, sessions for men. I think the thing about research is that as you're kind of going through it, you realize that you're oftentimes you have to pivot. It never actually unfolds how you plan, the study. And so you might say that you'll do 3 sessions that are focused on sort of different things, and the plan was to maybe have all the all your group, all the populations together, et cetera, et cetera. But there are times when pivoting is necessary, and so kind of in that case, it was found that it was necessary to sort of add on an additional session where where there was evidence of marginalization. Then that would sort of create a space for them to be comfortable to participate.
I just thought of another way in which we kind of address the question in the chat. Our community partner, East Scarborough Storefront, sees itself as a voice for the less privileged in the community. So their focus is not on it being everything for everybody, but actually specifically addressing cases of our community issues related to anti-Black racism, for example, or anti-immigrant sentiment and so on. So they have chosen to focus their efforts strongly on those communities that have been least represented in the formal decision-making process. So that's another way one can think about this issue, is look for partners that that are of that orientation, and at least redress the balance a little bit between who normally gets heard by the city, for example, and who doesn't.
It strikes me from what you're both saying too, that in some cases, the researcher might not be the most appropriate person or vehicle at any given point in the process, right? If there's a women only meeting, maybe you're not welcome, or maybe you know, maybe I could go in as a woman, but that you're not going to, the conversation or the sharing might not be the same. And that's really, again, where these partners and their investment in the process and their ability to give of their own relationships, of their own brokering capacity is really valuable. And so that, you know, that really kind of, again, underpins the importance of building those pieces in early, and making sure that, you know, you're doing the same on the parts where, you know, you can play more of a leading role.
And also having governance rules and rules of procedure that address those. So this specific situation in the chat where the researcher is marginalized vis-a-vis others in the community, e.g. a woman experiencing sexism from a research participant, if it's crucial, if that happens, that person, that woman, feels comfortable raising that in the context of the project, right? Because if they don't, it just stays underground and invisible, and it just does harm. So that's about, I think, these rules of engagement being really clear and really articulate as much as possible. And Nakota, of course, as you said, you know, no plan survives reality. But nevertheless, you can try, you know, make an effort to have a process where people feel comfortable, the research team feels comfortable among themselves and with the partners to raise those kinds of questions as much, you know, as much as you can.
Yeah. And I'll just add very quickly, Christy, that you know, when the project is co-designed with the community, usually before implementation, they'll flag certain things that they see as potential issues. So, you know, if they see that, okay, well, this is because, again, I mean, you're coming in, right? And you don't necessarily have a full appreciation or understanding of the context. And you sort of rely on, you know, kind of the community members at times to sort of give you this, you know, this context, depending on sort of the groups that you're working with. And so if it's co-designed, yeah, they'll flag, they'll say, okay, well, this is an issue. And they'll tell you, they'll ask you quite bluntly, at least in my own experience, how do you plan on addressing that?
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm thinking of this situation with others in the community. This is also maybe where you need a diversity of approaches, right? It might not just be the women only meeting. You need all of these different kind of participants, but you have to create the a safe space so that engagement is meaningful. And so some flexibility in what you're doing and how you're doing it and who you're doing it with at any given time. If you can't resolve the issue between these two individuals, makes a lot of sense. So I wonder about, I'm going to shift gears a little bit because I think it relates a little bit to what we've been talking about. I know I have seen situations in the past where just having an academic enter any given context sort of changes the flavor of the room. And John, I've heard you refer in the past to the white coat syndrome. And I definitely have seen even with, you know, sort of more conventionally powerful groups, in this case, business leaders, politely listen to an academic as they make suggestions around the solutions that should be pursued, and then wait for the person to leave and then talk amongst themselves about what was really realistic. And how do we sort of control for this possibility, whether it's with community partners or others outside of the academy?
I think we need to always remain aware that in common parlance, the adjective academic means irrelevant, right? When someone says that's academic, they don't mean, oh yeah, that's really important and we need some experts in. They mean the opposite. So I think that is a useful corrective to our tendency to think, you know, we have all this expertise that's so important for the world to understand. My own view on this, there's one approach which I think is very effective, and that is students. People react very differently to students than to faculty. And I think students are our best. Lead with students is kind of my feeling on a lot of these things. They're young, energetic, enthusiastic, engaged, and they don't create necessarily the same kind of reaction. They don't have a white coat yet, perhaps, to wear. So I think a lot can be done that way. The academics can maybe step back a little in the whole process.
One of the I'll just add my 2 cents here, but one of the examples of projects that I've come across, what they did was they hired, it was, you know, for focus groups or town hall meetings, they would hire facilitators from the community. You know, these are people who, of course, they have facilitation skills, so they have, you know, their experience having done that in this particular case. And so, you know, the researchers would be in the room, yes, but their role would be sort of secondary in terms of leading the discussion and the conversation. They would allow the community, you know, facilitator to do that. And it's again, it sort of helped with when we think about the governance of the project. You know, there was sort of a community advisory, if you will, that again, this was another thing. It's like, this is going to be a problem. What are you going to do about it? And you know, one of the solutions that came up was, we need to hire facilitators from the community. And the participants felt more comfortable participating in the discussion as a result. So I think that's one thing that we can also do.
Yeah, that's great. And you know, we talk about speaking the same language or being bilingual, and I think we have a higher chance there of you know, of even the terminology that's being used, of servicing the values that they see in the community is might have a greater chance of being visible and being heard from the people in the room through local facilitators. So we're just coming up on the end of our time. And I just want to say thanks to everybody for joining. This is a conversation that, of course, could go on for hours and hours and days, and it's one that we've recently started at the University of Toronto, but we are always finding more and more opportunities to get deeper, to build our community, to really advance the opportunities that we have more and more to support and celebrate this kind of unconventional approach to research at the university. So I just want to let people know that this won't be the last that you will hear from us on TDCP co-production, and also to thank you for joining. We have in the link, I think, a feedback survey that we're going to be sending to all participants. And if you could just give us your reflections on today's conversation, as well as, you know, what you'd like to hear in the future, we'd very much benefit from it. Thank you to John and Nakoda for your leadership and your insights on this very important topic.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christy.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.